BBC.
Reporting from Kuala Lumpur.
Reporting from Moscow.
Reporting from Cape Town.
Reporting from Washington.
Reporting from Phnom Penh.
Reporting for the BBC.
In South Africa, the outer symbols of apartheid are being dismantled. The hearings of the Truth Commission are supposed to heal the scars within.
If they can just show us the bones of my child.
Reconciliation depends on forgiveness.
I did terrible things. I did terrible things to members of the ANC. But as God is my witness, believe me, I have also suffered.
There were victims on both sides.
My wife is wearing a long blue coat. Can you remember if you shot her?
In exchange for truth, killers get amnesty. But are they getting away with murder? Apartheid may be over, but it's only now that the grief is coming to the surface. At a Sunday service in KwaZulu Township in Port Elizabeth, they pray for Joyce and Sipho Timkulu as they prepare to go before the Truth Commission. The deacons lay their hands on the family's shoulders to give them strength. Truth is an ordeal. They must be ready for it. Sipho Timkulu was only 20 years old when he led the Port Elizabeth students against apartheid education. In April 1981, police took him into custody. They held him without trial for 6 months. They took him here to the Sanlam building, the most feared place in Port Elizabeth, where hundreds of black activists, including Steve Biko, were interrogated. The police beat Sipho until he lost consciousness. They threw him into a bath and held him under water until he nearly drowned. They made him stand on a chair until he collapsed. For weeks they tried to get him to name his fellow activists. When he refused to confess, they took him out to Jeffreys Bay. They had a barbecue, and he sat naked on the rocks. With a hood over his head, he shivered in the surf. When they finally released him after 6 months, he was unrecognizable.
This last detention has done something to him. And he had a comment that he said to us, "These Boers have finished me this time. They have finished me this time. I am nothing, absolutely nothing. I don't think that I will survive long."
Sipho spent months in hospital, paralyzed and in a wheelchair. His hair fell out. The doctors diagnosed that he'd been given rat poison in prison. But it didn't finish him. He continued to lead the students from a wheelchair. He even launched a prosecution against the police, naming his torturers. A few days later, he disappeared.
Okay.
His parents were left with nothing but press clippings and a lawyer's deposition naming his torturers. But for 8 years, Joyce and Sipho didn't give up hope. They prayed their son had fled over the border to join the ANC guerrillas in exile.
Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man taking his first steps into a new South Africa.
In 1990, Nelson Mandela walked into freedom and the ANC exiles returned. Sipho was not among them.
Walking strongly, step by step, further into freedom.
The release of Mandela, to me, it was the loss of my son, because he should have come back with others. That hope that everybody's coming back home. The other people got happy about that. But to us, it was the moment of tears, because our son never came back.
It's been 14 years since their son's disappearance. Today, the Timkulus are hoping to get the chance to tell their story. The Truth Commission has traveled to Centenary Hall in Port Elizabeth to hear victims give testimony. Joyce and Sipho hope that by testifying in public, they'll be able to find answers to the questions they could only ask in secret during the apartheid years. Desmond Tutu chairs the first hearings of the Commission. The hearings are supposed to be much more than judicial proceedings. They're healing rituals in which a whole community undergoes the catharsis of truth.
These hearings provide a forum for those who have been treated in the past as if they were rubbish.
Joyce is planning to name her son's torturers, but suddenly proceedings are halted.
Thank you.
The lawyers have filed application that Mrs. Mthimkhulu must not climb that podium.
Order, order.
There is uproar. Joyce and her family are overcome and have to be helped from the hall. The police deny any involvement in Sipho's torture and disappearance. They issue injunctions to stop Joyce testifying. The whole process depends on the perpetrators confessing. When they don't, victims suffer.
Many people, in a sense, mistake the purpose of the commission. We're looking for the truth not in order to pillory somebody, not in order to mock them, not in order to prosecute them. We're looking for the truth basically for two reasons: so that it can help the process of healing, and perhaps more importantly, in a way, so that we can know what not to do again. And if some of these people who were accountable understood just this little truth, that all the people want is for you to say, yeah, and sorry, and then move on.
Sorry is one word which has not crossed this man's lips. For years he was the most feared policeman on the Eastern Cape. Gideon Nieuwoudt, the man Sipho named as his main torturer. But as the hearings continue, Nieuwoudt's lawyers prevent other victims from naming him. They can only refer to him as Mr. X.
I was beaten up.
Mr. X.
The first person to assault me was Mr. X. People must know that these men that we're not supposed to mention. People must know how busy he was, how active he was in the torturing of people. He took my genitals, and Mr. X shut the drawer. He squeezed and squeezed my genitals.
They put a stick behind your knees and you were hung upside down. Whilst this was happening, you were suffocated.
The catharsis of truth is unbearable for those who testify and for those who listen.
That's actually the last time I broke down, because I decided that people were paying attention to me rather than to the witness. Most times now I say, God, for goodness sake, please don't let me break down, and I have to use things like looking up at the ceiling. But it is quite overwhelming.
Finally, after months of obstruction by the police, Joyce Timkulu gets her chance to speak. The whole community is there, believing that the hidden truth of apartheid will at last be revealed.
He continued to lose his hair. I'd like to show you.
She's brought one piece of evidence to the hearings. She's kept it for 15 years. It's all that remains of her son, the enduring proof that he was indeed poisoned by the police. One of apartheid's repellent secrets is about to be revealed.
This is Spiwo's hair. This is the scalp attached to the hair. That person is...
Joyce does not want vengeance, but she needs the truth to lay the past to rest.
You don't cut the scalp. If they can just show us the bones of my child, I will be grateful. Where did they leave the bones of my child? Where did they take him from Port Elizabeth? Who handed him over to them? Where did they take him to? What did they do to him?
Both sides are counting their losses and confronting their memories. Darby Ackerman returns to the St. James Church in Cape Town, where he and his family have always worshipped. They were praying together in a crowded service one Sunday in 1992 when 3 men from a black guerrilla movement named APLA burst in. In one instant, a scene of worship was turned into a scene of horror. The guerrillas lobbed a grenade and fired indiscriminately. In 30 seconds, the dead and injured were strewn among the pews. One of them was Marita, Dowie's wife.
It was carnage. I've never lived through anything like that before. It was... While the attack was going on, I realized it was an attack, and there was a disbelief that it was happening in the church. And I remember praying, God, why is it happening? Please save us.
While Darby Ackerman mourned his wife, the nation stepped back from the brink. After the attack on the church, the ANC and the government agreed the transition to majority rule, but he kept his grief locked inside him.
Life wasn't worth living if it wasn't for the fact that I was a Christian and that I feared God and that I still had responsibilities towards my children. I could very well have carried out a suicide attempt.
These photo fits were all Ackerman had seen of his wife's killers, until they applied for amnesty at the Truth Commission. They'd fought for a cause, and they'd been tortured, and like Ackerman, they'd considered suicide.
Apla then was fighting, returning a bullet with a bullet, so that you, people in the government, could hear the cries of the children. If your ears couldn't listen, Apla decided to take guns to open the ears that were not prepared to listen.
But here the victim was listening and took action.
May I address the applicants? May I ask the applicants to turn around and to face me? This is the first opportunity that we've had to look at each other in the eye and talking. I want to ask Mr. Makoma, who actually entered the church, my wife was sitting right at the door when we came in, where you came in. She was wearing a long blue coat. Can you remember if you shot her?
I do remember that I fired some shots. But I couldn't identify. I don't know whom did I shoot or not, but my gun pointed at the people.
I've never cried over the death of my wife, other than have silent cries. But I've never had an emotional crying outburst. While Mr. Makoma was testifying, and he talked about his tortures and that he was suicidal, I could identify with that. And I thought to myself, what are we doing here? The truth, yes. But I looked at the way in which he answered you, and his anger. How on earth are we going to be reconciled?
A gesture was needed, and 10 minutes later, the gesture came.
We are sorry for what we have done. It was the situation in South Africa. Although people died during that struggle, we didn't do that out of our own will. We are asking from you, please do forgive us.
Repentance is not a condition of amnesty, but it does make forgiveness possible.
I want you to know that I forgive you unconditionally. I do that because I am a Christian, and I can forgive you for the hurt that you have caused me. But I cannot forgive you the sin that you've done. Only God can forgive you for that.
His wife's killers will probably get amnesty. Ackerman accepts that as the price that must be paid.
I was as much a recipient of the benefits of apartheid than any other white person. I did not ask for it. I did not vote for it. I was born into it. In the same way, my black and colored South Africans were born into the same situation. We all have to now cancel that out, draw a line through it, and do the best that we can with the future. And this is what I believe that the majority of South Africans actually really want in their hearts.
For many of those who carried their comrades to their graves, amnesty for killers is a travesty of justice. But Desmond Tutu insists that amnesty saved the country from a future of funerals.
This had to do with whether this country was going to survive or not. If the security forces had thought that they were going to be up for the high jump, we would not have had the negotiated settlement. That is the price that had to be paid. And yes, the victims, the survivors, are probably being asked a second time round, be willing to pay a price. But if this high price had not been paid, we would not be sitting here. This country would have gone up in flames.
Amnesty does not come easy. Jeffrey Benzine tortured and murdered ANC activists in the 1980s. To get amnesty, he has to run the gauntlet of his victims. He must face their anger, and he must answer their questions.
Do you remember saying to me that that you are able to treat me like an animal or like a human being, and that how you treated me depended on whether I cooperated or not? I can't remember it correctly, sir, but I would concede I may have said it. Can I then also just ask if you remember that while I was laying on the ground that somebody inserted a metal rod into my anus and electric or shocked me? I deny, and Mr. Forbes, if I'm denying this, then one of us two are lying.
You personally arrested me, Mr. Benzine. Yourself and Piet Goosen. You remember?
It's difficult to remember, sir.
It's not true that you and Goosen assaulted me throughout the trip?
I would concede that in all probability I did. I don't know how though.
In the new South Africa, this man is now Jeff Benzine's boss.
I was blindfolded and then the bag was used on me. I would want to be given the opportunity by the commission to see what it did to me with my own eyes.
Because the victims were blindfolded, this is the first chance they've had to see what was done to them. While the Amnesty Commissioners stand and watch, Jeff Benzine is made to demonstrate how he drew a wet bag over a victim's head until he nearly suffocated. The idea is to reenact the torture so that it will never be part of the new South Africa.
What kind of man uses a method like this one of the wet bag to people, to other human beings, repeatedly, and listening to those moans and cries and groans, and taking each of those people very near to their deaths? What kind of man is that?
Not only you have asked me that question. I, Jeff Benzine, have asked myself that question to such an extent that I voluntarily approached psychiatrists to have myself evaluated to find out what type of person am I. There was a stage when this whole scene was going on that I thought I was losing my mind.
It was in lonely farmhouses like this that police hit squads did their dirty work. They were trying to turn guerrillas into informers. Only the torturers knew which ones had turned and which ones had stayed true. Nason Ndwandwe and his family visit the place where his daughter was brutally murdered. For 9 years he's lived with the suspicion that she'd become an informer. They're here to perform a Zulu ritual of purification over the spot where she was buried. But Nason's spirit cannot rest until he finds out the truth. Pila Ndwandwe was an ANC underground commander who disappeared in 1988, leaving behind a 4-month-old son. The police said she'd become an informer. The police told a different story when they applied for amnesty for Pila's murder. They led investigators to the abandoned farm and told them where to start digging.
Pila Ndwandwe.
All over South Africa, killers seeking to avoid prosecution and going to jail are leading Truth Commission investigators to the site of their crimes. Without the bait of amnesty, the full extent of South Africa's dirty war against the freedom movements would never have come to the surface. The police doused the bodies with lime to make them dissolve. They never imagined the bones would help them get amnesty. Pila Ndwandwe had been stripped naked. She went to her death wearing only a plastic bag around her pelvic region. Her killers admitted that they'd tortured her for days before killing her with a single bullet to the head.
Shot from the top of the head. Yeah, this looks like an entrance.
As her bones were reassembled, her killers admitted that they had lied. She had never been an informer. She had died without betraying her comrades. The Truth Commission brought Nason and Ndwandwe to the morgue in Pietermaritzburg. There, with his wife, he viewed the remains of a daughter whom he now knew had died a hero. The truth can be terrible, but it's better than shame.
They have actually brought to me a 9-year-old history, which I wouldn't have known. I'm an old man. I would have died without knowing where my daughter is.
So the Truth Commission gave you back the truth about your daughter, but it also gave you back her honor as well.
Oh, definitely. It took out all the shame I had of having a daughter who was an informer, and yet she was, according to the ANC, was the best commander of the MK.
Many weekends now, a 7-year-old boy arrives at Nason's door. He's the spitting image of his mother. After Pila's story got on television, Nason was able to find Pila's son. The Truth Commission gave Nason much more than the truth. It gave him a grandson he'd never known. And that wasn't all. At Durban's football stadium, they came out in their thousands to sing the old songs of struggle and to celebrate Pila's bravery. Even the president was there. For a boy who was only months old when his mother was murdered, it was all a little overwhelming. They gave Pila and those who died with her a hero's funeral. And they gave her son something he'll never forget. Pila's medal.
Long live the spirit of Portia and Ndwandwe, long live! Watinta bafazi! Watinta bafazi!
Thanks to the Truth Commission, a son can finally bury his mother, and her spirit can rejoin her ancestors. But not all stories end this way. Only a fraction of the victims know the truth, because only a fraction of the perpetrators have confessed. Finally, 18 months after they began, the Timkulus are once again on the road to the Truth Commission. Aluta and Sikumbuzo are hoping to find out how their father Siphiwo died. His killers have at last admitted his murder, and they've applied for amnesty. Joyce Timkulu now believes she may get the truth at last, but she's decided to oppose their amnesty application. In Port Elizabeth, the hearings turn into community festivals. Security is tight. The people will be just a few feet away from policemen who terrorized them for years. The perpetrators, or amnesty applicants as they're known, enter the hall and take their seats with their lawyers and their bodyguards. The hall is full of Siphiwo's comrades, many of whom were tortured by these men. The atmosphere is electric. From the killers' amnesty applications, the community knows the bare facts. Siphiwo was abducted, tortured, and shot. They're here to see the tables turned, the interrogators interrogated. All rise for the amnesty commissioners. This is a courtroom, after all. Joyce and Sipiwo's daughter are 20 feet away from the men who killed him. Mr. X can now be publicly named the torturer Gideon Nivot. Herod Erasmus, the commander who ordered the elimination. Nick van Rensburg, who pulled the trigger. And Herman Duplessis, who was also involved in the murder. To get amnesty, they have to prove a political motive. The Amnesty Commissioners are a black civil rights lawyer who works hand in hand with a right-wing Afrikaner. This is the new South Africa in action. The commission is chaired by a liberal judge. They have to decide whether this was a political killing or just plain murder. The perpetrators try to argue that Sipiwo's militancy had made him a threat to the South African state.
My impression with great piety, Your Honor, my impression was that he was extremely militant because of the conflict between the black ideology and the whites really came to the fore.
He was a speaker at all these meetings, and where they incited the crowd to violence.
Sipiwo was poisoned in prison, but the police deny having anything to do with it. They argue that when he came out of hospital, he'd become an even bigger threat. So they decided to shut him up once and for all.
There was no other way. Detention or any other thing other than to eliminate these people. When you're talking about elimination, you mean to kill them. That is correct.
When he was released, he was a wheelchair case.
That is correct.
And up to the time of his death, he was still hobbling around with the aid of a stick. He couldn't walk properly.
That is correct. That is correct.
Is this the man you considered so potentially dangerous as an activist that he should be killed? This invalid?
That is correct. That is correct.